My daughter-in-law pressed her fingernails into my son's forearm at a charity gala table, and held them there until he stopped talking. Her father, 2 seats down, watched it happen, set his wine glass down slowly and said, loud enough for everyone at that table to hear, "Good, he forgets where he is sometimes." Nobody said a word. 8 people with clear sight lines to what just happened, and not one of them said anything, including me, his father. If you stopped the story there, you'd probably say I failed him. And if I were 40 years younger and hadn't spent 3 decades learning what actually wins, I might agree with you. My name is Graham Shea. I'm 64 years old. I live in Hamilton, Ontario, in the house my wife June and I bought when our son Rowan was 2. June died 26 months ago. A Tuesday morning in February, pancreatic cancer, 8 weeks from diagnosis to the end. She was 59. She had a laugh that made strangers turn around on the street. And she never once said a bad word about Celia, which is the thing I've come back to more than anything else since this whole business started. I spent 32 years as a senior claims investigator for a national insurance carrier out of their Hamilton office. Liability, bodily injury, the complicated files that other adjusters handed off because they didn't want the hours. The work comes down to one rule that I've lived by since my first year, and I need you to hold on to it because it explains every decision I made from that table forward. You document before you touch. You do not move the scene until you've documented it. I've watched newer adjusters ruin solid cases in the first 5 minutes. Pick something up before it's photographed. Make a phone call before the incident report is locked. Every one of them meant well, and every one of them handed the other side a gap. The scene is the truth. Your feelings about the scene are not evidence. That has been in my head since 1991, and it turns out it applies to a great deal more than insurance claims. Rowan is 33. He grew up playing rep hockey in Ancaster, did his construction management diploma at Mohawk College, and has been coordinating commercial builds for a mid-size firm in Burlington for about 6 years. He's good at it. He manages subcontractors twice his age and nobody gives him much trouble, which tells you something about how he carries himself. He met Celia Harlow at a mutual friend's cottage weekend up in the Muskokas in the summer of 2020. They were engaged within 18 months. I walked him to the altar and I meant every word of the toast I gave. Celia is 31. Sharp, well-organized, the kind of person who has an answer ready before you've finished the question. She's the regional HR manager for a logistics company with distribution centers in Hamilton and Brantford. June and I had her to the house for dinner the first month Rowan brought her around. I noticed that she corrected small details in other people's stories as a reflex, with a patience that sounded like generosity if you weren't watching for it. I didn't say anything to June about it. June didn't say anything to me. We both gave the benefit of the doubt because our son was happy and we hoped we were wrong. Her father is Richard Harlow, 63, residential and commercial developer, has had his name on projects across Halton and Hamilton for 20 years. His face is in the back pages of the Hamilton Spectator twice a year minimum. Breaking ground on something, accepting something, sitting on the dais at something. He speaks in a boardroom voice in every setting. The first time I met him, he interrupted Rowan mid-sentence to correct a detail about a project Rowan knew better than he did, then looked at me like he expected agreement. I smiled and changed the subject. June said afterward quietly, over the dishes, "That man has never once been wrong in his life, which is the most dangerous thing a person can be." The gala was a Saturday in October. The Hamilton Halton Children's Hospital Foundation annual fundraiser, held at the Ancaster Golf and Country Club. Black tie optional, tables of 8, the kind of room where everybody knows somebody and the wine is folded into the ticket price. Rowan's company had bought a table. I went because June had attended every year and it felt right to keep going. I want to slow down here because the 45 minutes between arrival and what happened are the whole story, and I've gone back over them the way I used to go back over a complicated claims file, frame by frame. We were at a round table near the east windows. 8 seats. Me, Rowan, Celia, Richard Harlow, a colleague of Rowan's named Ben and Ben's wife, and 2 people from the Foundation's sponsorship committee. Approximately 200 guests in the room. The table behind us had maybe 4 feet of clearance. The band was setting up near the far wall. It started quietly. Those arguments always start quietly. 2 people who've had the same argument enough times don't need volume anymore. I'd noticed it at family dinners before. The tone Celia used when Rowan said something she considered an overstep, something that split the difference between patient and final. The kind that sounds perfectly reasonable to anyone who doesn't know what they're listening for. Rowan was talking with Ben and Ben's wife about a build they'd finished up in Waterdown. A foundation repair that had gone complicated in an interesting way, the kind of thing Rowan lights up over. Celia was in conversation with one of the foundation people. And then Rowan laughed, genuinely, at something Ben's wife had said, and he leaned back in his chair with the ease of someone who is comfortable where they are. Celia stopped mid-sentence. She reached across and put her hand over Rowan's forearm on the table. Not a touch, a grip. Her fingernails were dark red and she pressed them in, 4 points, and held. I watched his body register it before his face did. His shoulders came forward a fraction of an inch. He went very still. The stillness of someone who has learned that stillness is the fastest path through. He stopped laughing. Richard Harlow, 2 seats down, had been watching. He set his wineglass down. He looked at Rowan with an expression I can only describe as proprietary, the look of a man assessing something he considers his business. And he said, at full volume with a small nod, "Good, he forgets where he is sometimes." The 2 foundation people at our end of the table looked at each other. Ben's wife put her fork down. The room around us kept going. The band was warming up, 200 people, ambient noise. But at our table there was a stillness that had nothing to do with any of that. And Celia said, without releasing his arm, "It's fine, he just needs reminding." I have sat across a conference table from lawyers billing $400 an hour and told them their client's claim didn't hold. I have delivered findings that cost people significant money without raising my voice once. I have never in my adult life wanted to do what I wanted to do at that table. My hands were flat on the cloth in front of me, and they were completely still, and the stillness was doing a great deal of work. There is a thing that happens in your forearms when you are 64, and you watch someone put hands on your child in a room full of people. There is a sentence that runs on a loop underneath it. Mine was the one I first said to a junior adjuster in 1997 who was about to pick up a piece of evidence before I'd photographed it. Document it first, because once you touch it, you've changed it. If I stand up, I'm a 64-year-old man making a scene at a charity gala. There's a version of that story going around by morning, and Richard Harlow knows every journalist at The Spectator by first name. My son goes home with Celia that night carrying whatever I've just handed her to use against him. She wins. He pays for it in a room I can't see. That isn't restraint. That's 32 years of understanding exactly what happens when your reaction outruns your documentation. My hand moved, not toward Celia, not toward Richard, toward my jacket pocket. I took out my phone, opened the camera, set it against my water glass angled toward Rowan's side of the table, casual as a set of keys. Neither of them registered it. That's the thing about people who are certain they're entitled to what they're doing. They don't check for witnesses. I recorded 48 seconds. Her hand on his arm for the first 19 of them. His face, her face. Richard Harlow in frame mid-nod, the wine glass partway to the table. The lighting in that room was warm and the phone was clear and every second of it held. Then I put on my jacket, looked at Rowan and said, "Let's get some air." Not loud, the voice I used when I was about to close a file. We were in the parking lot off Meadowbrook Road in under 5 minutes. We sat on the 403 ramp for 11 minutes in traffic. There was a game at First Ontario Centre, Saturday night, and he didn't say anything for the first stretch of it. Then he said, "Dad, please don't do anything stupid." I said, "Already did something." He looked at me. I said, "I recorded it." Long pause. He looked out at the Burlington Skyway lights across the water. He said, "Dad." I said, "Rowan, has she done that before?" He didn't answer. I've sat across from claimants long enough to know that the first person to fill a silence gives ground. I waited. He said to the window, "Not like that, not in public like that." I said, "How long?" Nothing. I said, "How long, Rowan?" And he said, "About 2 years." He said it wasn't always physical. Mostly it was the monitoring, her going through his phone, the calls he had to account for, a silence from her that could run 4 days, and he was never told exactly what started it. The physical part had been, and he stopped and started counting, his left hand on his knee in the dark of the cab, and I watched my 33-year-old son count, on his fingers in my truck on the side of a highway in October. 4 times. Someone had put hands on my son 4 times and he hadn't told me. And here's the part I have to say out loud even though I don't like it. I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And he said, "Because Richard Harlow has 3 lawyers on retainer, and you would have gone after him. And he would have buried you, Dad. And I couldn't, not after Mum, I couldn't watch that happen to you. I want you to sit with that for a moment. I have sat with it for 6 months. The thing I have been most proud of my entire working life is that I'm the man who figures it out, who builds the file, who walks out of the room with the finding. My son had been living in something that was hurting him for 2 years, and he hadn't come to me because he was protecting me from my own reaction. Not protecting her, protecting his 64-year-old widowed father from doing something that would put him in front of a judge in a case he'd lose. Whatever else I got right in that truck, I had gotten that wrong for 33 years. I didn't say it in the cab. I just put my hand over his and said, "Okay, here's what happens now. You don't have to decide anything tonight. Just let me work." He said, "I don't want this to become a hole." I said, "Rowan, she did that in front of 8 people and her father told you it was appropriate. It already is a hole." He gave me one small nod. The nod of someone who has been holding something very heavy for a long time, and has finally set it down somewhere that might hold it. He slept on my couch under the quilt June made. I sat at the kitchen table and watched that video 4 times, until I was certain I had what I thought I had. I had it. Then I made 2 calls. The first was to Bert Kowalski. Bert was my counterpart at another carrier for 15 years before he moved to independent investigation work in Oakville. Sharpest reader of evidence I've ever met. He picked up on the second ring at 11 at night without complaint. I said, "Bert, I've got video of Celia putting hands on Rowan at the foundation gala tonight. Her father endorsing it in frame. Room full of people." Long pause. He said, "How clear?" I said, "Clear enough you can see where her fingers were." Another pause. "Does she know you have it?" "No." And then his voice shifted, the same shift I have from person to professional, and he said, "Get a family lawyer before 9, before she gets her own advice." Then, "Graham, you didn't touch anyone." I said, "Didn't need to." He said, "That's the whole thing right there. Keep it that way." The second call was to Andrea Lung, a family law lawyer with a firm at Hess and King in downtown Hamilton. I'd met her through a workplace injury case 8 years back. I left a message on her after-hours line at 11:30, and she called back at 7:45 the next morning. I gave her the short version. She asked, "What does Celia do for work?" I said, "Regional HR manager." Brief pause. She said, "And Richard Harlow is on the foundation board. The same foundation as the gala." I said, "Yes." She said, "Bring the phone, not a copy." 9 o'clock. I was in her office before 9. She watched the video twice. On the second pass, she stopped it on Richard Harlow's face, mid-nod, and looked at me over her glasses. She said, "Graham, do you understand what you have here?" I said, "I have an idea." She said, "In 12 years of family law, I have never once had the endorsement on video. Not once. The abuser, yes. The family member cheering, never." Then she started laying it out. Emergency protection order through the Ontario Court of Justice. A report to Hamilton Police Service. Ancaster falls under Hamilton jurisdiction. And then she paused and said, "Her employer." I looked at her. She said, "A regional HR manager has a professional obligation to conduct standards that most companies take extremely seriously. If her employer receives a police report number and a description of this incident, they open their own review. She likely signed a code of conduct when she took the role." The irony is not lost on me. Then, "And the father." I said, "What about him?" She said, "A man on a children's hospital foundation board who is on video encouraging physical coercion and characterizing it as appropriate correction. That foundation will need to know. They will not want to not know." I sat in that chair with the morning light off King Street coming through the blinds, and I thought about Richard Harlow, sitting back with his wineglass, certain and proprietary. And I thought about the families of those kids, sitting at gala tables next to his table year after year. I want to be straight with you about what I felt in that moment. I did not feel bad. I have thought about it since, and I still don't. Richard Harlow said what he said in a room with 200 people and a security camera in the corner. That is not something I did to him. It's a scene. I documented it, and I gave it to the people whose job it is to look at scenes. That is the only thing that separates documentation from revenge, and it's a thinner line than most people admit. I have stayed on the right side of it for 32 years by one rule. I never said anything that wasn't true, and I never went one step outside a process. I gave my statement to Hamilton Police Service Sunday afternoon. The officer who took it, Constable Ferris, watched the video once, asked to see it again, and filled out the incident report with the care of someone who had been properly trained. She said the venue would have their own cameras. I said, "I'd expect so." She said, "This is a clean file, Mr. Shea. We'll follow up with the club this week." Monday morning I made Rowan eggs and toast, and we sat at this kitchen table for 2 hours, and I didn't push him once. He showed me his phone. 18 months of messages. The ones that started "I need you to understand" and ended with an instruction. The ones that said "I love you" inside a sentence that was actually an accounting. 4 photographs he'd taken in the bathroom of marks he'd never shown one living person, time-stamped, never deleted. I photographed every screen. I asked him why he thought she'd done it at the gala, in a room full of people. He thought about it. He said, "Because her father was there. She was showing him she had me managed." He stopped. Then, "And because you were there, Dad. I think she thought you wouldn't do anything either." That's it right there. 2 audiences, 1 performance. Then he said, "Is this actually going to work?" I poured him more coffee. I said, "Yes. But I need you to understand something, and I'm only going to say it once. None of this matters if you go back." He looked at me. I said, "I can build you a way out. I cannot walk you through it. That part is yours." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Mum never trusted her, did she?" I said, "Your mother had the best instincts of anyone I've ever known, and she never said it out loud because she thought you'd dig in." He said, "She was probably right." Then he laughed a little. It was a thin, worn laugh. But it was the first one in 4 days, and I'll take it every time. The emergency protection order came through Wednesday morning from the Ontario Court of Justice. Celia was served at her office in the industrial east end of the city at 10:30. I'm told it was in the middle of a team meeting. Hamilton police pulled the Ancaster Golf and Country Club security footage that same week. 2 interior cameras, one of them with a clean angle behind Celia's shoulder. The table, his arm, the whole thing from an independent position. A charge of assault was laid. She turned herself in through her lawyer Thursday afternoon and was released the same day. It's a summary offense. I want to be clear about that because people hear this kind of story and expect something larger. She wasn't imprisoned. She was charged, and in her line of work, a charge is the part that matters. Her employer placed her on administrative leave pending internal review the following Friday. The irony of an HR manager under an active assault charge for conduct at a professional event is not something I needed to point out to anyone. The review was still open the last I heard. The Children's Hospital Foundation contacted Richard Harlow's office the week after that. The letter asked that he voluntarily step back from his board position pending a conduct review. He made 3 phone calls to people he knew on the committee. It didn't change anything. The footage had already been received and reviewed. You cannot undocument a scene, no matter how many people you know. Rowan's divorce lawyer, a colleague Andrea referred him to, sent the full package to Celia's lawyer in the 3rd week of November. The video, the club footage, the police charge number, 18 months of messages, 4 time-stamped photographs. A written account that Rowan and I put together over 3 mornings at this kitchen table, dates and descriptions in his words, which cost him something to do and which he did anyway. Celia's lawyer went quiet after receiving it. I have heard that silence before on speakerphone calls and in boardrooms. It's the sound of a strategy being set aside. They came back in 10 days, negotiated. The matrimonial home in Waterdown was sold, equity divided per the Family Law Act. His pre-marriage RRSPs were protected. The contributions made during the marriage were assessed and divided. Done in 3 weeks. No hearing, no courtroom. Andrea called me the morning it was filed. She said, "It's finished, Graham." I was at the sink in my kitchen, the February light coming through at that particular flat angle you get in Hamilton when the lake cooperates for 40 minutes in the afternoon. She said, "You built this." I said, "I didn't build anything. I just didn't step on it." Rowan picked up the keys to a rental in Waterdown in March. He came by the house on a Tuesday to collect some things from the garage, and he brought groceries and made a pot of that thin coffee he's always liked, which I have never once complained about. And we sat here at this table for a couple of hours and talked about nothing urgent. His new place, the drive to Burlington, whether the Leafs were going to find a new way to break everyone's heart, or just use the same one again, which we agreed was more likely. At some point he looked across at me and said, "At the gala, Dad, when she did that, you could have stood up." I said, "Yes." He said, "Why didn't you?" I told him what I've been telling you for the last 35 minutes, except shorter. I said, "Because if I stand up, this becomes a story about a 64-year-old man making a scene. That's the headline by morning, and Richard Harlow makes sure of it. You go home with her that night carrying whatever I've just handed her to use. She wins, and whatever happens next happens somewhere I can't see." I said, "I wasn't calm, Rowan. I want to be honest about that. I was nowhere near calm. I stayed useful. There's a difference, and the difference is the only reason you're sitting at this table right now." He looked at his coffee for a while, then he said, "The insurance thing." I said, "The insurance thing." Before he left, he went to the front closet and pulled out a bag I hadn't noticed he'd brought in. He set it on the counter. Inside was June's cast-iron Dutch oven, the big one, the one she used for Sunday stew all through the winters we had together, the one he'd taken when they'd moved to Waterdown. He said, "This should stay here." I didn't say anything. I put it back on the hook beside the stove, where it had been for 27 years, and we stood there in the kitchen with the afternoon, doing what February afternoons do in this city, which is make everything look like a photograph of something you're already starting to miss. So here is what this taught me, and it is not the thing people expect me to say. The lesson is not stay calm. Nobody in the history of the world has ever been successfully told to calm down, and I wasn't calm anyway. The lesson is this: anger is fuel, not a plan. It gets you through the door and then it burns the building down with the evidence still inside. The question is never whether you're angry. The question is whether what you're about to do makes the person you love safer in 6 weeks, or just makes you feel better in 6 seconds. That calculation takes about 3 seconds to run and it costs nothing, and I have never once regretted running it. And then there's the other lesson. The one I got wrong for 33 years and would take back ahead of almost anything else. My son didn't come to me for 2 years because I spent his whole life being the man who handles things. And somewhere in there he heard that as, don't bring him something he can't handle without doing something he can't take back. He wasn't protecting her. He was protecting me. And without meaning to, I had taught my own child that his safety was less important than keeping his father from destroying himself over it. If there is one thing I'd ask you to do after this, it's small and it will feel strange. Find the person in your life who thinks of you as the strong one. Your kid, your brother, whoever it is. And tell them, out loud, in plain words, whatever it is, you can bring it to me, and I promise you I won't go off. Say that second part. That's the part that matters. Most people aren't silent because they think you don't care. They're silent because they're afraid of what caring will make you do. And the question I sit with most mornings at this table is, who in my life is protecting me from myself? And how long have they been doing it? One more thing and then I'll let you go. If any of this sounded like your house, if the part about sorting things into acceptable and not acceptable made something in your chest go tight, that's worth taking seriously. In Canada, sheltersafe.ca will connect you to a crisis line or a shelter in any province or territory. It's there at 2 a.m. when you're not ready to call anyone yet and all you can manage is a question. You don't have to have a plan. You're allowed to just ask. Now I want to hear from you because this one divides people and I think that split is worth talking about. Comment 1 if you think I made the right call, staying still, reaching for my phone. Comment 2 if you think I failed him by not standing up right then, that a father who watches that happen to his son and does nothing has already lost something no outcome can give back. And comment 3 if you think I went too far, that the foundation referral, the employer piece, was past protecting my son and into something else. I go back and forth on 3 myself. Tell me honestly, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. And if you have ever had to hold yourself completely still while someone you loved got hurt because moving would have made it worse for them. Tell me what you did with it afterward. I'm still working on that part, and I think most of us are. If this one meant anything to you, stay with me and subscribe. It's just me and a kitchen table in Hamilton and a microphone. There's another one coming. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined to create original content. Any resemblance to real persons or events is coincidental.